Presentation, if that's okay with the panel. And next person up is Gonzalo Castillo, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Okay. Let's start with the, if I can figure this, there is. Okay, we'll start with I'm from the Fish and Wildlife Service. I work mostly on Delta Smelt, so my talk will be Smelt-centric. And I was asked by some to present something unrelated for this workshop on flows and export to inflow ratio and things like that for the workshop. And I was able to come up with some relations. I want to start by saying that a lot of the analysis in the last, since the pelagic organism decline, have emphasized a biotic habitat. At least the one that appear more simple to observe in a graph. There have been a number of modeling efforts that have been conducted, life cycle models or individual-based models that go beyond that, and have evaluated some of these questions on the effects of exports and what is the proportional loss. So I will go into a more simplistic path and look into basic flow relations that I found using databases that are publicly available. So let's start with the life cycle for Delta Smelt. We have Delta Smelt is in essence one year life cycle species. Has lost a lot of its age 2 individuals. It used to be more common in the previous decades, but for probably the last 20 years, since the early 90s, there was a big step change in the size composition, and with then the larger proportion of individuals have disappeared from the population, so there's probably less buffering capacity for recruitment failure in a given year, since we don't have much of the larger individuals that used to be the way to buffer the population, particularly because of their high fecundity. They're much more fecund than individuals of age 1 that now are virtually the entire population. Used to be still the age 2 individuals, probably less than 5% based on the literature, but now it's probably less than 1%. Going to the overall background of conceptual models, I think this was presented in the previous workshop, the outflows. I will emphasize the different component of in the tier 2 water diversions and hydrology. This pertains to this workshop. There are many other factors that are interrelated to the diversions, the biotic components, harmful algal blooms. I don't know where's the other issue. The climb mentioned earlier. There are other issues with submerged aquatic vegetation that are also a very, very good issue that tomorrow will be addressed. So I will just mention here that if we had looked this conceptual model maybe 20, 30 years ago, entrainment here and here is only during the adult and larval stage, but right now there's hardly any entrainment going on in this subadult and juvenile stages. You will see later the changes in the salvage over time, and it has been a very pronounced change in the pattern of salvage for the species in those life stages. So the objectives that I have for the presentation are evaluate the relations between delta Smelt abundant indices. What is the delta Smelt proportional recruitment index versus these flows? So this is just based on the available indices computed by the Interagency Ecological Program. The compute one, the index is a cumulative number of individuals assigned over different areas. In this case, I use foamy water troll or spring Kodiak troll, and the next generation is either the larval or early juveniles measured by the 20 millimeter survey or the tone net survey. That is the next survey. So this adjustment is done to account for the parental contribution or to control for differences in the number of spawners that gave rise to the next generation. So, and the last objective is to also address the delta Smelt salvage and as a proxy for entrainment related to flows too. So this is what I mentioned about the publicly available information. Is a very good source of data that is available at that website. And the Dayflow, the Department of Water Resources, maintain the site, and I indicated in yellow highlighted in yellow the flow estimates that I use in the computations of possible relations with delta Smelt abundance and recruitment rate or proportional recruitment. Also indicated there what has been referred before, the Old and Middle River produced by the USFWS. The total inflow is not shown here. It's just the composite of all that is shown here, the composite of all these inputs into the system. So export will be one of the diversions that I will include along with the next indices of, at least the three of them are related to proportion or percentage of water diverted, the export to inflow ratio, the combined state and federal exports divided by the total inflow, the Q divert or the percent of water diverted for internal use and export, so it's account for greater losses in the delta. This is not a percentage of or a ratio. It's actual flow, but it's subtracting the loss cost to water use or diverted from the southern delta, and this last is based on the previous one. And what is the percentage of that water diverted in the delta resulting from this diversion in San Joaquin. So the fact that we have surveys for all the life stages except for egg stage is remarkable for delta Smelt. The last two were added for the species. Those other two were not designed for delta Smelt. 200 meters was designed for this. This was since the early 50s. This was also not designed, but the summer tone net survey and spring Kodiak troll are new, more recent surveys, so there's not much information for long-term data sets, but we have enough to start showing what the data shows in correlations with flows. And finally, the salvage monitoring, the Skinner Fish Facility and the Tracy Fish Facility are used to produce these relations with different flow variables or diversions. So the first stage was to do just a rank correlation analysis for the abundances and also for the recruitment ratios. There was a different period of averaging from 3 to 4 or 5 months for each of the variables, and later the analysis continue with regression models for the proportional recruitment, and finally also for the relations with salvage and selected Dayflow variables. These are a summary of the relations using the surveys for the 4 life stages, pelagic life stages. We have, overall, there's a lot of similarities among some of these surveys. Some of them are highly correlated, like a XQ diversion or effective diversion and XPIN. Export not so much, but I will eliminate some of this in the analysis to focus on some of the years that seems to be relevant. So the analysis for this correlation included only the more recent months for the larval and the juvenile stages, within like 5 months from the index, the time that the index is produced for the adults and the sub-adult. I like that 1 year to see a population response over a larger time. So the first, the effective proportion of central and western water diverted from January to April as a percentage of water shows an inverse relation with this recruitment rate. Notice that the effective diversion is up to about 30% in the entire period. If we had more data, we could have compared what happened in previous decades where the effective diversion was up to 64% in some years or 50% in 2 others. But overall, this is one of the strongest relations. We have one here, not as strong, but interesting thing, those are extreme years and outliers, both wet years. The difference seems to do with the big change in the response from the larval to the juvenile stage. So 2006 didn't respond as well. It was more like an average response compared to other, or near the upper limit of all below diversion of 25%. For the total inflow in the delta is also a relation, and again the 2 wet years appear to be relevant for the regression and appear in the next slide as well for this type of recruitment ratio. Now with QWest, the net flow at Jersey Point was not significant using the entire data set because of this year 97, a wet year, extremely high outflow. But removing that data point, we see the relation that conform to a more linear relation. We have, for the period from October to January, QS look like more like exponential relation for the relation with the flow. This is I mentioned earlier in previous talks, the XGU, the flow that comes from the Sacramento River into the delta, and it's interesting that I was not sure what to expect out of this relation, and someone doesn't seem to be a positive relation, but in this case seems to be probably a covariability as a result of higher levels of beneficial flows. For in general, it may not be the reason that this would be the increase in recruitment in those years. So this relation may be underscoring just hydrology in general. Now looking at XPIN, the export to inflow ratio, we have no relation in this particular graph with all the data. However, we can notice that most of the higher survival or survival rate are adjusted for, I will call it recruitment rate, adjusted for the previous spawners, tend to occur at values of XP lower than 20% or 0.2 in this case, as the index computes. There were two outliers, dry years. That's worth investigating why the survival was high in those 2 years. But the response with the San Joaquin River also shows 2007, 2011, and 2005 they tend to have a importance in driving the relation, and that doesn't appear as clearly as in the next one, where only 2011 and 2006, where the total outflow of the system is also related to this recruitment rate, increase in recruitment rate with outflow. So in terms of delta smelt entrainment, we have, as was indicated earlier, there's no entrainment monitoring. We have at least some indication of what may be happening with the data. Is a valuable source. Having salvage is a valuable source of information, but it doesn't underscore the magnitude of the problem. As indicated in the study mentioned here, the index doesn't appear to be consistent for evaluating entrainment. Some of the analyses that have evaluated the population level effects have not taken into account the changes in effective population size. I will refer to that a little later, or selective removal of individuals as well. That could be already happening or may have already happened in the population. So finally, we have the changes in the South Delta exports, the removal of fish in the San Joaquin River. These are from the earliest studies. The population existed in the South Delta, but not anymore. We have also indicated in this other publication very low number of individuals remaining in the San Joaquin. So all this point out to these changes in salvage in this from the early 90s. Well, the changes were gradual, but suddenly there's almost absent salvage except for a few years during the fall or late summer and fall. We see a relation with exports and the index of the tonnage survey. The same for the water troll the previous year. Negative relations, and in terms of relations between total salvage and salvage density, there seems to be a proportionality, except for some years like that. This is the scaling for the number of adults, like I did before, in terms of salvage. Notice that what happened during the pod years, the salvage per adult or pre-adult was probably as high as during the early salvage event in the 80s. And this is the period that also Katie Fish et al. In 2011 found a large decline in effective population size of delta smelt. So it's something to consider when evaluating population level effects. For juveniles, we had also substantial increases in this period of the pod, and salvage and salvage density. Adjusting again for the salvage per spawner. Also see large numbers. And now the relations between the All Middle River. This happens only, these relations are, if you plotted all the data available from 1980, you will see a straight line. So these relations appear only from the 90s, when the population already had disappeared from the South Delta. Before that would have been, wouldn't take much export to find high numbers of delta smelt in the South Delta. The same for this, the juvenile relation is also plotted only from the 90s to the year 2011. So in conclusion, delta smelt abundance index are proportional, and proportional recruitment index seems positively influenced by delta flow estimates. The inverse happened for the diversion estimates that I showed. Salvage of entrainment relations were only apparent following the virtual disappearance for the species in the South Delta since the early 80s. Finally, the accounting for the influence of delta flows and diversions on delta smelt habitat and entrainment is a central issue to evaluate sustainability for this endemic listed species. Well, we are out of time now, that we could address later in the...
Got time for one question. Seeing no questions in the panel now, is